On behalf of our team at Dr. Damage's show, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. May this season bring you joy, happiness, and love. We thank all our sponsors, patrons, advertisers, supporters, and viewers. You are the reason we do this week after week. We are committed to doing more in the new year to keep the conversation going. Our ultimate goal is the same, to build a better society for us all, our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. We can do it if we keep our eyes on what matters most: transparency, accountability, fairness, and justice. On these pillars, peace plants its roots as it germinates and blossoms. 10 years from now, what you will regret most are those moments when you were so timid in loving others and so conservative in helping others. This is true, irrespective of the possible outcome. For only then can you beat your chest and say the greatest thing any human can ever say: I might have given a little, but I have given all that I have. Sasha! Tweet that out. Merry Christmas to you and a Happy New Year. Until next time, I'm Dr. Damages. I diagnose.
You heal yourself.
Ooh.
Our guest this Sunday needs no introduction. He's a journalist with over 40 years of experience. He's the author of more than 5 books. He has taught in some of the most important universities in the world. His new podcast, The Upside Musings, is blowing up Apple, Spotify, and Audible. He just chaired the 2022 Akko Prize Committee of Judges for African Writing. His latest work, Never Look an American in the Eye, is a staple for memoir writing studies. He says that a story that must be told never forgives silence. Please welcome to the show, Professor Okey Ndibe. Okay, Professor Ndibe, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Dr. Damages. Or should I say Rudolph Okonkwo?
Yeah, on this show, I'm Rudolph Okonkwo. Yeah, but sometimes Dr. Damages will come out. We don't know where he comes from. We have the unknown bishops now, so there are characters coming out all over Nigeria. Now, welcome. We have some serious things to talk about today. Yes. The headlines in the newspapers. If you look at newspapers today, Sunday, you see one of the headlines says, "I challenge you to sit for 1 hour interview." That is Atiku challenging Tinubu to sit for 1 hour interview as a proof that he's ready to be president, So that's how our democracy,
That's where we are now.
That's where we are. Yeah, that's where we are. We are at the point where being able to sit down for a 1 hour interview is the proof that you can run a country.
Yes.
So have you been following the political situation in Nigeria?
I'm afraid I have been. It's not, how shall I put it? It's not the most palatable of vocations, but several decades ago, I made a pact with myself to become a writer and to become a commentator on Nigerian politics. And part of what comes with that territory is that one has to monitor political developments in one's country. So I must tell you that I'm sure you feel the same thing. It's very painful. It's sometimes traumatizing. In fact, I was just saying to somebody earlier today that it seems to have become a habit in Nigeria that in order to become the president of the country, you have to be broken in a profound way, either mentally, psychologically, or physically. So going by that sort of seeming national tradition, Tinubu, who is clearly enfeebled, who is clearly in poor health, will seem to be the perfect Nigerian kind of president, because we have tended to elect people in office who then, whether it's, well, even those we didn't elect, like Abacha, and in some ways, going back to even Babangida, men who were already struggling with ill health, presuming to run a country that is complex and dynamic and that really ideally should be run by the most engaged, energetic, alert, and physically fit men or women.
Now, I don't know if you watched the interview that Atiku granted Arise TV. That was yesterday or 2 days ago, Arise TV, and that interview, it was an opportunity for him to tell the country what he's going to give to the nation should he be the president. But most people who watched it didn't feel that he did a good job. Did you see the interview?
No, I haven't watched it. I've seen snippets of news reports of that interview. But even so, I mean, I'm not surprised. In a society that takes itself seriously and takes public leadership seriously, people like Atiku and Tinubu would not present themselves to be leaders. And so I'm not surprised. Atiku does not have the requisite intellectual, moral, and perhaps even physical stamina to run a complex nation like Nigeria. Nigeria is several decades behind where it should be. So we need, if anything, first grade material. People who understand what leadership means, people who have a certain vision of society, a certain vision of how to transform society, and who have the can-do spirit to take on that task. And Atiku just is in the mold of the typical Nigerian politician who aspires to leadership simply because really there are no consequences to failure in leadership, right? Everything is on the upside. You know, they end up making more money for themselves, more money for their inner family and for their cohort and their friends and so on. And they move on. They would have awarded themselves the highest national honor. And Nigeria is a place where memory lasts perhaps minutes. So the moment you leave and it's somebody else who takes over, Nigerians will forget all the atrocities that you committed as a leader. And that's why all kinds of really mediocre men and women, men mostly, present themselves to run the country and to run the states and so on.
So is there anybody running now that you think is suitable for that position?
Well, I famously said that Nigeria is at a critical state in its evolution that I don't think anybody who is elected is going to begin to make a dent. So I have proposed in several columns as well as in my podcasts that rather than hold the national elections next year, that different sectors in Nigeria should get together and select Nigerians of distinction in various areas of professional life and of endeavor, and that these individuals should constitute an emergency interim government that should run the country for as long as it takes. I'm not saying 1 year, I'm not saying 2 years. If it takes 10 years, they should run the country because we don't have the foundations to start with. Something as fundamental as the Constitution. The Nigerian Constitution is to put it mildly, a constitution. Okay, so we need a constitution. We need to set up national guidelines. We need, by the way, to resolve the question of whether we want Nigeria as a nation to start with. There are some people, it's become fashionable for some people to say that Nigeria is not negotiable. Nigeria is eminently negotiable. Any collectivity, political collectivity, is negotiable. Okay, Nigeria has not served any groups in Nigeria that I can see. And there are some people who think that the Northerners are doing well. Well, the few select members of the Northern elite are doing well, but so are the few select members of the Igbo political elite, the Yoruba political elite, the Ijaw, the Fufu, the Hausa, Efik, and so on and so forth. But Nigeria as a concept and as a reality does not work for 99%, perhaps more, of Nigerians, right? So if Nigeria is going to work, then we have to define, what does Nigeria mean? Okay, so if you ask a Nigerian, what does Nigeria represent for you? They either would not have a clue, or if they have a clue, it's likely to be pain, it's likely to be trauma, it's likely to be that they experience Nigeria as some kind of menace, you know. So the police in Nigeria will harass you. If you're driving from Lagos to, say, Onitsha, you know, you encounter the Nigerian police every mile, okay? You encounter the customs every 2 or 3 miles. You encounter the soldiers at some checkpoints, and they can intimidate you, they can detain you, they can kill you, okay, and tell a story. So Nigerians don't have a sense of what their country means, apart from the pain that their country can cause them. So having said this, and some people's response to this prescription is, oh, you know, the Constitution does not
give room for that.
Give room for this. And I say to them, Nigeria does not exist. At any rate, the politicians who run the country do not run it according to even the imperfect, deeply flawed constitution that we have. So to say that the Constitution doesn't allow it is actually laziness. We need to.
But hold on. I like where you're going, because people also raise this issue, and they say, how do you make that thing to happen? You know, how do you form what you call the emergency transitional government? Or so how do you begin? And who are the people that will be there? Wouldn't that be the same people that are currently in the Senate, in the House, in the, you know, who will represent the people that are not the same people that are everywhere?
Okay, well, this is my vision of it, right? In Nigeria, we have professional groups. We have groups representing doctors, lawyers, journalists, labor, university teachers, okay, architects, engineers, and so on. My vision is that Nigeria is broken on so many different levels, right? So you and I know of some states where governors have built bridges that only by God's grace, and we know that God's grace does not extend to, to bridges, right? So if you build a bridge that does not meet the proper engineering quantities and so on, structural integrity, that the bridge sooner or later, more sooner than later, is going to collapse, right? So we need all the sectors, and we need a sense, and I think that everybody in Nigeria understands now that the country is bankrupt. And when I mean bankrupt, well, I mean that it's not just financial bankruptcy, which it is. As you know, the government now, the federal government borrows money to pay salaries. Now, it's going to get worse next year. It's like almost 100% of the country's earnings are going to go into servicing the country's debt.
It's already happening.
Precisely. So a state, a country where all the resources available to the government go to servicing debt, and in order to pay salaries, the government has to borrow money. Can you see how ridiculous and absurd that is, right? So for us to pretend that there is a country that somebody will run to be president in, is to fool ourselves. We don't have a country. And so really part of what we need to do is to signal to Nigerians that we want to explore the possibility of having a country. If we're going to have that country, like any entity that exists, we should treat this as the founding moment, really, or the refounding moment. But we've missed so many opportunities to found Nigeria. So all the professional groups should get together and bring out their best. They would know the country is bankrupt. So there's no point, in every organization, people know the corrupt, inept people. So if you ask the Engineering Association to bring out their best to be part of this interim government, they're not going to bring a fool who is perhaps didn't pass his engineering exam, but through bribing lecturers and so on. Doctors will bring out their best to create for the first time a healthcare system, to give a sense of what a healthcare system would be. Engineers will give a sense of what approaches we need to take to create infrastructure in the country, right? Lecturers will present people who will begin to think with ideas of creating an educational system that is wholesome and that is productive. Otherwise, what we're doing is to recycle failure and disaster and tragedy and mediocrity.
Let me push back, because people
Yes.
will say that something like the Nigerian Bar Association, they've been having elections, and the elections are not different from the election of the political
The Nigerian, politics,
So that if you actually say to the Nigerian Medical Association to produce people that will go into a kind of committee or government that you are proposing, that it will be the same class of people that will emerge, because they see that as opportunity to run the affairs of the country, and they could pay their way the way they normally do, and to come out on top. What do you say to that?
Well, look, I'll tell you. I'm aware of that. I'm aware that elections into the Bar Association, the executive of the Bar Association, are rife with corruption. But here's the difference. Government officials, over the years, have taken an interest in who becomes the leader of the Bar Association, okay? Because they want the leadership of the Bar Association to be on their side as they wreck the country, okay? So the government officials give the members of the Bar Association resources to run, right? But the difference now is that everybody understands the country is bankrupt. So I'm going into this committee. There's no money that you share. In other words, the other point I want to make is that those who are going to be in this would essentially be volunteering their time. Yes, you will be paid a stipend to maintain you, but you are essentially taking a stake as a founder of Nigeria for the first time. Nigeria has not been founded, as Chinua Achebe told me decades ago in my first interview with him, right? So even the corrupt ones will not go, because they would know that they're going there to come up with ideas for reforming the judicial system. And most of these people who bribe to become president of the Bar Association or something are bankrupt fundamentally of ideas. So when they know that they are going to go to a forum where perhaps the best engineers, the best technologists, the best doctors will be there, wrestling with the questions of how to reform different sectors of Nigeria. And if what they have is just a sense of how to go and steal money, right? There's no money to be stolen. You are not going to be president. You are simply a committee of experts in different areas trying to build a country that is really absolutely, wrecked.
Okay, we have to go into so many things, but let me push a little bit more, because people will say that the national conferences we've had, several ones, Abacha, Buhari, whoever, Jonathan, Obasanjo, how is this going to be different from those conferences?
Okay. So the national conferences we've always had, right, had the assumption they didn't have the same kind of urgency. So the urgency that I'm pointing to now, right, is an urgency that we don't have. We have a shell, we don't have a country. So we have emptied Nigeria of meaning. Okay. So if you look at events in Nigeria, and I'm sorry, I'm sort of getting to your question in a circuitous way, but imagine a country where law enforcement declares a man a terrorist who's killed people wanted. The same terrorist is being turbaned the Fulani leader of a community by an emir in the north. It's a public ceremony. It's attended by hundreds, perhaps thousands of people. And the security agencies in Nigeria do not go there to pick this man up. Okay? Imagine that in March of this year, people went to abduct victims from a train station. Since then, most of those who were abducted are still unaccounted for. Do you understand? Then imagine a country where a young woman writes a note on a listserv saying, hey, this listserv is for education. You should not be posting about your religion. And she is killed. And people make a video of this bonfire, okay? And months later now, we haven't heard of a trial that has started of the perpetrators of that crime, right? We're looking at a country where on February 14, Valentine's Day, university lecturers started a strike. That strike continues today. In other words, there has been no university education in Nigeria since February 14. And this is not a once in a 10-year event. It's a once in 2-year event. Do you understand? Then you look at a country where you travel from Lagos to any part of the country, okay? And the roads are in terrible shape. Where I went to Nigeria December of 2020, stayed there for a month. I stayed with a relative in Antony. I was pleasantly surprised that he had electric power for 20 to 22 hours every day. And I was happy. In April, I returned and stayed with the same relative. Now he had power for 2 to 3 hours at the best per day. So this is a country where an Obasanjo administration spent $16 billion saying that we're doing power projects. And there was nothing to show for it, right? And nobody has gone to jail. Nobody has been held to account. So we don't have a country.
So why do you think it's an emergency? It may be an emergency for you, but I don't think that it's an emergency for a lot of people because they are not showing that it's an emergency. let me play a video. Let me play a video before we continue. Okay. Just a small video, and you see the reaction of people after watching this. Okay. I'm sorry.
I'm begging you. I'm begging you to tolerate. I beg peace. Part of your master plan. You be there, and yes, I'll be a youth, and I'm a youth.
All right. So these people clapping for him, they were there physically seeing him and seeing his condition, but they are clapping for him. They are supporting him. They don't feel the sense of emergency.
No, they do. They do? I mean, let me put it this way.
Okay.
I'll put it this way. You know, we have no theater in Nigeria. In America, to have a good laugh, you go to a comedy store. Our politicians become our entertainment. But not only are they entertainment, they're also entertainment that would occasionally throw money up. And in a country that is dirt poor, if you're lucky, you snatch 100 naira, 200 naira, and you can buy akara or ogi for your family for the next day. Tinubu is that kind of entertainment. It is when Tinubu can go and stage all these events. To have a sense of the true feelings of Nigerians, you go back to a movement like NSAS. Okay? When NSAS was happening, youth in Nigeria were demanding major and perhaps even fundamental changes in their country. And that is what frightened the political leadership, and they decided to use brute force to mow down the youth. The true feeling, I can tell you, the true feeling of the generality of Nigerians is not reflected when they go to these events, where sometimes they're able to drink a mineral or there's something distributed. Nobody goes to these events unless they expect to get something. People did not troop to Tinubu expecting, oh, Tinubu is going to give us a vision of how he's going to improve our lives, right? People don't go to Atiku's rallies thinking that, right? Unlike in the First Republic when Zik or Awo campaigned, or Tafawa Balewa, there were people who believed. These were politicians who, as flawed as they were able to articulate a vision. Some of them wrote books, which they really wrote. The books are not written for them by their speech writers. They really wrote these books. So don't be deceived that there are people who go to Tinubu. They are not, in a lot of ways, they think that they have no hope. So this is all they've got, okay? And so when they go there, I mean, so let me sort of tell you a little bit of what happens, say, in the Southeast. You know that funerals and traditional weddings have become extraordinarily spectacular events, okay? So people talk about befitting burials. There's a lot of money, there's a lot of expense, there's a lot to eat and drink. What I've been told is that if somebody has wealth that the community considers inordinate, that the community considers inexplicable, people will come to your, let's say you lose a relative and you're doing a funeral. People will come there, ask for a bottle of beer, drink half of it, throw the rest away, and ask for another bottle, drink half of it, and throw the rest away. It's their way of revenging because they feel you have wealth that you did not earn. Okay? So, and people will come and pack food to take home. They don't just come to eat, right? So part of that reaction is poverty. People are poor. So even if a thief, a well-known thief, calls a meeting, people go because they have to eat. But the other thing is, once they have the opportunity and nobody is looking, that thief could be lynched, which is why these thieves, whether they are politicians or bureaucrats and so on, walk around with security around them. Tinubu does not mix with people. Tinubu will not do an Obama event where he goes to the crowd and starts shaking, doing high fives. Okay, so there is this. Yeah, people will shout back and seem to praise him and so on. But I can tell you that there is no love lost between him and the people.
Okay, let's talk more about the emergency, the sense that this is an urgent situation. There are people who feel that way. But they've decided, they've looked at the country, and they've decided that it's not working anywhere, that they are going to pull out of Nigeria. So you find them in the Biafran movement, the Odua movement in the West, and several other groups in other parts of the country. So what's wrong with that their position, that they are fed up with Nigeria, they could see the emergency you are pointing out, and they feel like, okay, we want to leave. It's not working for us, and we can't wait anymore. You're muted. Can you unmute yourself, please? You muted yourself. I think it's an accident.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So for me, I said earlier that I don't consider Nigeria as sacred. So Nigeria is open to negotiation. And what that means for me is that Nigeria could contract, could become smaller by different groups living, or Nigeria could actually become bigger if part of Cameroon, through a plebiscite, wants to join Nigeria. I welcome it, right? There is nothing wrong fundamentally with agitation for separation, okay? I actually think that it should be the rights of people to agitate to leave. But also what I tell people is I once was in Boston for a conference where I spoke on the Biafran question. And I said to people, when you say that Biafra is the answer, what is the question? Okay? So I'm not saying Biafra is not the answer, but what is the question? Now, I lived as a child through the first Biafran War. And I know that there was a lot of energy and passion. This desire by people to determine their own affairs. But I also know that in the midst of the war to achieve Biafra, that there was a lot of injustice in Biafra. Okay? I happen to know that officials hoarded relief material that was donated by international agencies, hoarded them for themselves, for their friends. And you go to the market and see bags of rice and bags of beans marked not for sale, being sold in the market. It wasn't small-time traders who went and got it. It was government officials, Biafran government officials, who distributed these things to their fronts to sell for them, as their own people were suffering. So the idea that if we became Biafra, every problem will be solved is self-deception. So what I say to people is, if you want Biafra, that's fine with me, provided you understand that when you create Biafra, you have to struggle to achieve a fair, equitable, just country. If you think that once they say Biafra, or they say Anambra becomes a country, or Imo becomes a country, that, oh, all the problems will disappear. I want people to recognize that when they're saying that Nigeria is a zoo, when that statement is made, I say to people, I can accept that. Nigeria, as currently constituted, resembles a zoo. But that zoo has been created by the political elite, who include Igbo people, Yoruba people, Anang people, Efik elite, Fulfulde elite, Hausa elite. It was not created by one group. And when people say, try to assign virtue to themselves, okay, I say to them, you are engaging in self-delusion. The kidnapping that happens in the Southeast is done mostly by Igbo people. Okay? So suddenly, Igbo people have begun to do some of the things that we criticized in, say, Boko Haram. The kind of gruesome violence that we engage in. Okay? The decapitation of people. So I want people to know that we have all been traumatized by Nigeria. So one option is to fight collectively across ethnic, religious lines to recreate Nigeria. Or, and I'm willing to accept this, to separate into our different units, but with understanding that when you retire to your different enclave, you still have to struggle in order to create a country that will be meaningful for you. If you think that Biafra is just going to be all bliss, I have the Atlantic Ocean to sell you.
Yeah, but the people who support Biafra, they will say, oh, they do the One Nation. They will say one of the talking points that is difficult to argue against is that they think they can within that Biafra or Odua nation, they can control their politicians. They can put them in check. But within the Nigerian context, it's difficult because of the structure of things. The federal power protects these political actors in the regions that they have no power to. They actually someone pointed out the issue of Ngulumili in the East. Basically saying that because the federal government was not really involved in dealing with that, they went in, the local people went in and dealt with that. So how do you fault that argument?
Okay, so how I fault it is, first of all, it's like a society can quickly devolve into a kind of jungle ethic. Okay, so when people say we can handle our local politicians if we're Biafra, or if we're Duduwa land, or if Anambra State or Imo State now becomes a country, we can neutralize our politicians who are errant. They have a fundamental misunderstanding of the way that power operates. Money is an important asset in the fight for political power in any community. So if Imo State became a state tomorrow, became a country tomorrow, Russians will be far more powerful than a lot of people, would imagine. He's got the money. Perhaps that money was stolen from Imo State, but he's got it. And once he's got the money, he can be dangerous. He can hire people who will beat up his political opponents. He can bribe electoral officials. Corruption is not going to disappear just because a state has been miniaturized. Okay, and at any rate, I think that what we have in Nigeria, what we have in our space, is what I call a moral and cultural crisis. I went to school at a time, and I'm sure you did too, when my parents would not hear of some of the things that are practiced today. So today, a tradition called sorting is so commonly practiced in schools all over the country, where parents will give their wards, their children, money during exam time to go and bribe lecturers. There are special centers, right? You know about it yourself. I knew about it just 2 years ago. Places called special centers, where parents pay for their children to go take exams, because those centers will find somebody to take exams for your children, or the invigilators will be telling the answers to children. It was unthinkable. I mean, my parents would have killed me if I went to them and said, "Hey, bring money. There is somebody, I will bribe an invigilator, and he will give us the answers." So my parents would say, "Why did we pay for you to go to school? Go and become something else, become a laborer or something," right? So we now have a cultural crisis. And part of that cultural crisis played out in the Bakassi movement in the Southeast, where our people said that there was some mystical way of determining who was an armed robber. So they said they will put a knife on the floor, and they will ask you if you're a suspect to jump over the machete or something, and that if you're an armed robber, the machete will turn red. And they will decapitate a human being. Okay? So that might be what we relapse into, So yes, we could go and start setting fires to the homes of corrupt politicians, but then we're not running a human society. We're running according to the ethic and rules of the jungle. So if we want a civilized society, if we want a society that has true democracy and that brings the fruits of development to people, we have to modernize our ways of thinking. We have to become more objective, essentially. We have to start saying, if there's an election and there's somebody from our hometown who is running, or from our home state, or from our ethnic group, or from our religion, but we know that somebody else from a different hometown, from a different religion or state is better. We have to vote for that other candidate. But our people, too many times, will vote for our own man, even if he's worse.
Okay, that brings us to a very good segment. If you look at the political environment today, there is former governor of Anambra State called Peter Obi. I'm sure you know him.
Yes,
and,
very well.
Yeah. So a lot of people are putting him up as the hope, maybe the only hope within the political system of today. What do you think about him? What is it that people outside Anambra State probably see in him that people probably inside the state may not think that is there?
Okay. Well, first of all, there is a kind of movement. There is a kind of Obi has excited a lot of Nigerians, especially young Nigerians. And I think that's the reason for that is understandable. Nigerians have not, in a long time, perhaps after the 60s, Nigerians have not found a politician, a political leader, a political aspirant who appears to have thought, who appears to think about the problems in the country and to spell out those problems and to articulate in some way ways of addressing those problems. So will tell you of the productive, the capacity of the productive capacity of energy in Egypt, in Indonesia, in Thailand, in this and that country, and then compare it with Nigeria. So he gives figures and so on. So Nigerians see that as a breath of fresh air. We've always needed that. Okay, so when the Nigerian politician, typical Nigerian politician, will say to you in that very lazy repetition of a cliche, I want to be president, or I want to be governor, I want to be local government chairman in order to deliver the dividends of democracy, which phrase Obasanjo used in his inaugural address when he was elected. And so the Nigerians thought, oh, this is such an amazing phrase. So everybody, I want to deliver the dividends of democracy. And he said to them, how are you going to do that? I want to move the state forward or the nation forward. So it's very lazy. And that's typically because most of those who aspire to leadership in Nigeria are ill-educated. They are lazy mentally. So when he talks about all these issues, excites Nigerians. And Obi comes across as a youthful, physically fit person. So there's this combination of a certain sense of intellectual vibrancy and physical fitness, right? Which would be a welcome departure from what we've had in Nigeria. Now, my problem with Obi is that when he was governor in Anambra State, he and I had a very testy relationship, and I wrote quite a bit about him. I faulted Obi for a certain cult of personality, okay? That Obi is extremely self-referential, and it's not a good thing in a leader. A leader should be able to identify men and women who have gifts that he's then going to delegate challenges to, okay? When a leader presumes to know everything, that's actually a weakness. That's one. Obi also tends to overpromise. And Obi tends to, so Nigeria's problems are so deep and so fundamental and vast. So when you begin to give the impression that if you are made president, you'll solve everything, then I would say pause for a minute, okay? You cannot solve everything. Nigeria doesn't have the money. I don't think the international community has the stomach to lend us the money. So it's going to be a lot of doing. Maybe if he became president, he would take the first 1 year trying to just stop the bleed. Okay, because somebody who is a military officer in Nigeria told me that about 75% of the country's oil exploration is stolen. So by private individuals. Again, that's not a country. That's part of why I say we don't rush into an election. If even if people were able to steal 1% of Nigeria's oil production, that's a big crisis. But when it is more than half of a country's resources that's stolen, don't pretend we have a country. There's no country there, right? So to get back to Obi, another problem I have with Obi is what I call the self-inflicted hypocritical wound. Okay? When people don't ask you certain things, don't go stating things which may turn out upon scrutiny not to be true. Okay, so famously a few years ago, Big claimed that he owned only one wristwatch. And so Nigerians went out there and found pictures of him wearing several wristwatches. Okay, so such things. Okay, he was a wealthy businessman before he became governor. So it would be fine and expected if he owned several wristwatches. So when you come out and want to create an impression of being ascetic and being self-disciplined and restrained, and you tell a fib, then people will begin to wonder, if you're lying to us about owning one wristwatch, what else are you lying to us about? So I would say to him not to hug the microphone so much, not to be there speaking so much, to actually create a network of people who would work for him, begin to appoint advisors in different areas, and some questions that are asked of you say, go to this, my go-to man. That's who I have asked to look at the question of how to industrialize Nigeria. Go to this other person, that's who I have asked to begin to think about how to reform the educational sector. Don't be the one doing everything, because when you do it, you overpromise, you get into fibs, into falsehood, you get into unnecessary, unforced errors. And but having said all of this, I think that clearly of the three major candidates, Tinubu, Atiku, and Obi, I think that Obi is the most exciting of the three, right? And I think that we see that excitement on the internet. Whether it's going to translate, I was just in London and I was talking to some Nigerians that who came in from Nigeria for the Kane Prize that I went to hand out to the winner. And so there were a group of young people. In fact, two of them are lecturers who came from Nigeria, and then another person. So we were talking about the phenomenon around Obi, and I was wondering whether there was something real about it, or whether it was just an internet phenomenon. And they assured me that a lot of young people are indeed going to get their voters' cards, and with the intention of voting for Obi and of defending the vote. So maybe Obi will spring a surprise, perhaps. But in order to do that, he has to defeat the monster of his own flaws, and also the monster of ethnicity and religion and so on.
Yeah, very, very, very good. I like how you went to that, ethnicity and religion. The other candidate who is also being considered as a major candidate is Tinubu, and he picked Shetima as his running mate, and that caused a lot of problems for him within the party and even people watching outside. So the issue of Muslim tickets, what do you think about that? Do you think at this point it's not important or is important? Do you think the Christian Association of Nigeria, that is something that they shouldn't worry about the way they are worrying about it? What is your position?
Well, first of all, I think that Tinubu has had a very terrible run so far in his campaign. Okay, if anything, I think that his campaign in the very early going is losing steam. Look at all the errors he's made, right? His physical and mental fitness. Okay, there was that viral video where Tinubu appeared to have peed on himself. Okay, that raises questions about his physical ability. There are these videos where Tinubu's hands are shaking. Okay, even when he was speaking at the APC convention, he could hardly articulate. There's a refusal of Tinubu perhaps to engage with journalists, because Tinubu, when he speaks now, is a painful sight to watch. It's difficult for him to articulate a sentence. There is the fact that Tinubu just lost, okay, his own candidate, governorship candidate, who was the incumbent in Osun State, lost to a man, Adeleke, who is most famous for partying and dancing. That's not a good sign, especially shortly after Tinubu just became the APC candidate and his party was the incumbent party in office and lost. So there was Tinubu in Ogun State before the APC convention, boastfully saying that it was his turn to become president. And in that speech, he managed to insult so many people. He insulted Igbo people, that Buhari had run with these 3 Igbo men and, came to nothing. And then I basically made him president. Okay. And insulted the governor of Ogun State. Okay. So he had to apologize somewhat. But even the Yoruba people, I met a savvy Yoruba friend in London, and he told me that Tinubu presumes to be Awo, but he says he's not in the conversation at all, and that Awo earned the love and adulation of the Yoruba people, but that Tinubu has earned money from the Yoruba people, but has done little to earn the respect and reverence that people used to have for Awo. And then he chooses, after the history that Nigeria has had for 8 years and more, the history of Boko Haram, of unbridled attacks by herdsmen who have seized communities, raped women, pillaged farmland, without the government lifting a hand. A situation where over the last 8 years there have been so many attacks directed against, both Muslims and Christians, but mostly against Christians by extremist Islamist groups. A case where Buhari has set a record for nepotism in the country, where every appointment seemed to be an opportunity for him to lift another person from his own small part of the country into office. So given all of that context, for Tinubu to choose a Muslim ticket and invoke states where that has happened, or invoke the Abiola era, Nigeria is no longer in 1993. Okay, Nigeria has changed. And yet, perhaps the most important thing is that Tinubu himself seemed to have recognized that he did something that he ought not to have done. So he goes and hires a troupe of clownish actors and decks them out in the garment of bishops and priests and pastors to praise or disgrace the occasion. So why would you do that if you were doing the right thing? A leader worth his salt would have said, I'm going to face people, the Nigerian people, and I'm going to explain to them why I have made this decision and why it makes sense. Okay, so Kashim Shettima has described himself and Tinubu as the dream team. And I said, if this is a dream team, then I want the nightmare team. Okay, and so it's an insult on the intelligence of Nigerians. It's an insult to Christians that you make a choice and then you orchestrate this clownish, tragicomic parade of fake pastors and bishops. If you did the right thing, then just say, hey, I own it, and I'm going to make it make sense. So no, I don't think he did the right thing, and I think that his presidential ambition is quickly going to fizzle.
Okay, now we are going to also